She had never let herself think about what Mercer would do if she left. That was how she'd survived 3 years in his orbit, by refusing to look directly at the center of the thing she was circling. She filed his shell company returns. She cleaned the accounting blood off his quarterly filings. She sat across a mahogany desk from the most dangerous man on the Gulf Coast and told him when his numbers were wrong, and she had never once let herself consider what it meant that he always, without argument, listened. It was easier that way. Safer. Nell Quinn had not survived Beaumont, Texas, 2 eviction notices, and a family that stopped returning her calls the day she refused to cover their gambling debts, by developing complicated feelings for men who could make other men disappear. She had developed excellent professional distance instead. The Thursday it started to unravel was October, hot the way Houston stays hot long past when it has any right to be, the air thick with exhaust and bayou water, the kind of heat that pressed against the 22nd floor windows like it was trying to get in. Nell was already at her desk at 7:40 when Mercer walked through the glass doors of Gulf Meridian Holdings. He never knocked. He never announced himself. He simply materialized, and the pressure in the room shifted the way it does before a storm. He dropped a manila folder on the edge of her desk without breaking stride toward the window. "Delaware subsidiary," he said. "3rd quarter, the fuel offset numbers are wrong." "The fuel offsets are wrong because Darren filed them," Nell said, opening the folder. "I flagged it to Darren 2 weeks ago. He told me he'd handle it." "Darren is no longer handling anything." She did not ask what that meant. After 3 years, she had learned which silences to leave alone. "Sit down," she said instead. "I'll walk you through the correction." He sat. Gray Mercer was not a handsome man in the way that word usually got used. He'd been assembled for something more specific than aesthetics. Wide shoulders, a jaw that looked like it had taken hits and held, deep-set eyes the color of storm water. A scar crossed the knuckle of his right index finger, thin and pale and old, the kind of mark you got young and kept forever. He wore charcoal slacks and a white shirt, sleeves already rolled to the forearm, no tie. He had explained to her, exactly once, that ties were for men who needed other people to know they were serious. They worked until 1 in the afternoon. The fuel offsets. A flagged wire transfer from the Nevada subsidiary that needed rerouting before it became visible to anyone who mattered. 2 letters to regulatory bodies that Nell drafted in the formal, blameless language she had perfected, clear enough to satisfy an auditor, structured to reveal nothing that mattered. At one point, Mercer leaned across her desk to look at her screen, and she caught, just briefly, the smell of him, coffee and something warmer underneath that she had spent 3 years not cataloging. She moved the monitor so he could see it better and went back to typing. "You should eat," he said around 2. "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine. I said you should eat." He stood up and walked out without waiting for a response. He came back 11 minutes later with a sandwich from the place on the corner, which he set beside her keyboard without comment, and then he returned to his chair and picked up the file he'd been reviewing. She ate the sandwich. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. By 4:30, the Delaware filing was corrected, the wire transfer was clean, and both letters sat in his drafts folder. Nell saved everything, closed the secondary screens, and pushed back from her desk. "I'm leaving at 5 today," she said. Mercer looked up from the file. "You leave at 7. My contract says 5. The quarterly work is done. The letters are in your drafts. You can send them without me." She reached for her jacket. "Where are you going?" Not a question. It never was with him. Always that flat inflection of a man who considered himself entitled to the answer before he'd technically asked. "Out," she said. She had learned early that the best way to handle Mercer's silences was not to fill them. Other people filled them with nervous explanations. Nell let them sit. She slid her jacket on and walked to the elevator. Nell. She turned. He was still at her desk, the file open in his hands, watching her with those still gray eyes. That particular look she had spent a significant portion of her professional life refusing to name. "Be back by 8, he said. "Goodbye, Mr. Mercer," she said. The elevator opened. She stepped inside. Owen Park was waiting at Saigon Blue when Nell arrived at 6:15. He was the kind of man who showed up early and pretended he'd just arrived. She'd figured that out in the 3 weeks since they'd met at her friend Dana's birthday dinner. He was a structural engineer. He had a dog named Biscuit. He knew an impressive number of facts about load-bearing infrastructure, which was either a promising quality or a warning sign, and she hadn't decided yet. He was, in every measurable way, a decent human being, uncomplicated, the kind of man whose balance sheet was entirely visible. "You look great," he said. "I look like someone who just survived a federal compliance audit," Nell said. He laughed, an easy laugh, the kind that didn't need anything from you in return. She ordered the lemongrass shrimp and a glass of white wine and let herself, for 2 hours, exist in a world where the highest stakes were dinner conversation. She learned that Owen had spent 3 months in Vietnam consulting on a bridge project, and that the foe there had permanently ruined him for all other foe, which he described as a genuine loss he was still processing. She told him about the summer at 22 she'd spent doing data entry for a freight company in Beaumont, the most boring job she'd ever had, which was saying something given her current situation, which she did not elaborate on. When Owen's hand settled over hers on the table, casual, quiet, the gesture of a man trying something out, Nell didn't pull away. She looked at their hands on the white tablecloth and felt, in a detached and slightly uncomfortable way, that this was what normal felt like, that she was apparently capable of it. Then she felt it, that specific, sourceless prickling at the back of her neck, the sensation of a number that didn't add up. She turned toward the window. The street outside was slick from an earlier rain, neon bleeding into the puddles. She saw her own reflection, and Owen's. She saw a dark SUV idling at the curb with its running lights on. She saw the shadows in the space under the awning next door, where the light didn't quite reach. She couldn't make out anything specific. She looked back at Owen. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Long day." She finished her wine and let him walk her to the curb. He hugged her goodbye, the careful hug of a man who hoped there would be a next time and was trying not to oversell it. The dark SUV did not follow her Uber. She told herself she'd imagined it. Mercer was in her office when she arrived the next morning. Not his office. Hers, the smaller one with the 3 monitors and the filing cabinets, and the very good coffee maker he'd installed without comment 8 months ago, after she mentioned once, in passing, that the break room machine produced something that tasted like hot regret. He stood at her window, looking at the parking garage. He had a coffee. He didn't turn when she came in. "Good morning," Nell said. She watched him for 1 second. 3 years had given her a finely calibrated instrument for his moods. You developed one out of self-preservation. This morning, something was different about the set of his shoulders. Too deliberate. Like a number that was technically correct but arrived at through the wrong method. She sat down. I pulled the Pelican freight invoices. The October storage fees are inconsistent with. I know. Cross-reference against Meridian West Holdings, Nevada. I know. I'm already doing it. A silence, different from his usual ones. Smaller somehow, compressed. "How was your appointment?" he asked. She looked up. He was still facing the window. "Fine," Nell said. "Thank you for asking." He stayed a few more minutes. Then he left. She went back to her screen and told herself it meant nothing. She was very good at telling herself that. She found it on a Wednesday, buried in a billing invoice from Mercer's corporate law firm. She was looking for a misfiled trust amendment, a clerical matter, the kind that only concerned her and the IRS, when she noticed a billing entry for 11 hours of legal work logged to a blind trust she didn't immediately recognize. Partner rate, $1,200 an hour. The case subtext read, PARCO, Professional License Verification, State Board Referral, Asset Review. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time, the way you read a number that can't be right but is. She opened the back-end terminal she used to track the syndicate's capital movements. She wasn't technically supposed to be able to cross-reference legal billing against operations. But she had built large parts of this architecture herself, and she knew which internal doors weren't quite closed. It took her 38 minutes. She traced the thread from the blind trust to the Texas State Engineering Licensing Board's disciplinary committee, where an anonymous referral had flagged a paperwork lapse from 5 years ago in Owen Park's registration. The kind of technicality that should have generated a correction notice. Instead, someone had escalated it to a formal inquiry, the kind that delayed projects, made clients nervous, caused quiet, bloodless professional damage. The referral had been filed using a shell entity she had built for Mercer in 2022. Nell sat back in her chair. She thought about the SUV idling at the curb. She thought about Mercer at her window the next morning, too still, asking how her appointment was in a voice that told her he already knew the answer. She thought about the sandwich he'd brought without being asked, the coffee maker installed without explanation. 3 years of salary reviews that arrived with no discussion, at nearly double the market rate for her position. She thought about the meticulous, private way that man kept score. She had always told herself she knew the difference between being valued and being managed. She had let that distinction get blurry without noticing when it happened. She printed the billing entry. She highlighted the line item in yellow, the same yellow she used to flag discrepancies she needed him to look at. She picked up the paper and walked down the hall. She did not knock. Mercer was on the phone. He turned when she entered and held up one finger, the standard signal, and then his eyes dropped to the paper in her hand, and his face did something that lasted less than a second. A contraction, small and sharp, a man who has just recognized an error he can't correct before the other person has already seen it. He ended the call in 2 sentences and set the phone down. "Is there an error in the billing?" His voice was perfectly controlled. "No error," Nell said, "just an interesting line item." She set the paper on his desk and smoothed it flat. He looked at it. "Park, oh," he read. "Owen Park. I've been seeing him for 3 weeks." She kept her voice even, the way she did when she was walking a regulatory contact through something that could go very wrong. "Within 24 hours of my having dinner with him, you used a shell entity I built to trigger a disciplinary complaint against his engineering license. You had someone watching the restaurant." Mercer said nothing. "You saw him put his hand over mine," Nell said. That fraction of a second thing crossed his face again, and this time it stayed long enough for her to read it. Something stripped, something that had been private for a very long time. "He put his hand over yours," Mercer said. His voice came out flatter than usual, which meant it was carrying more weight than usual. "Yes, and you went home and started making calls." She looked at him the way she didn't let herself from across a desk. "You didn't come inside. You didn't say a word to me. You didn't ask me a single question. You just accounted for him, like he was a liability to neutralize." He was. "A civil engineer who took me to dinner and was kind to me." The evenness in her voice cracked by exactly 1 degree. "That is all he was. He had nothing to do with you. He had done nothing to me, and you went after his license, his career, because he touched my hand at a restaurant." Mercer's jaw tightened. "I am not your property," Nell said. "I have never been your property, and whatever this is, whatever the last 3 years have been between us, you don't get to prove it by going after people who are nowhere near your world. That is not protection, that is control in a better suit." Mercer set his hands flat on the desk. He looked at the piece of paper with the yellow highlight. He did not attempt to explain. He did not redirect. He had always been a man who knew when the numbers were conclusive. "Fix it," Nell said. "Whatever you triggered against his license, you reverse it today. His record needs to be clean." She picked up her bag, "And then I am going to need some time." "Nell." "I mean it about the license," she said. "Don't make me say it again." She walked out. She did not go far. She went back to her own office, gathered her things, and took the elevator down to the lobby and out into the Houston afternoon, where the air hit her like a wall, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, doing nothing in particular. She went home, she made tea she didn't drink. She sat on her sofa and looked at the wall. 2 days passed, she did not go back. The apartment was very quiet. She had always thought of quiet as something she wanted. After the noise of Beaumont, after the perpetual ambient chaos of Mercer's operation, she had told herself many times that she would appreciate quiet if she ever got it. She did not appreciate it. The quiet had no texture. There were no numbers to clean, no problems calibrated to the specific frequency of her skills. She sent a text to Owen checking on his license situation. He replied that the inquiry had been dropped, some kind of filing error on the board's end. He seemed relieved and slightly confused. She told him she was glad. She did not explain. On the evening of the second day, someone knocked on her door. She looked through the peephole. The man in the hallway was large, heavyset, and wearing a suit jacket torn at the shoulder. His face had the particular expression of someone who had rehearsed an apology on the drive over. She opened the door. Boone. Wendell Boone, Mercer's driver for the past 4 years, stood in her doorway, looking like he'd had a very bad 48 hours. He had a split lip and the beginnings of a bruise along his jaw. His hands, she noticed, were shaking slightly. "I'm sorry to come here, Ms. Nell," he said. "I know I'm not supposed to." "Come inside," she said. He came in. She pointed at the kitchen chair. He sat heavily. "He told you not to contact me," she said. "He told me if I came near you, he'd fire me on the spot." Boone pressed his hands together on the table. "But I've been driving for him for 4 years, and I've never seen him like this. Not even close." "Like what?" "Reckless." Boone said the word carefully, like he was handling something that might break. "After you left, he took a meeting he should have pushed back 2 weeks. The Delgado crew has been testing the southern port contracts for months, and normally he would have had the numbers, the leverage, the whole play mapped before he walked in the room. He went in cold. They knew it." He paused. "It got bad. 2 of our guys took hits. He's not hurt bad, but he's not good either. He's got himself barricaded in the warehouse on Harrisburg, and he won't let the doctor near him. Won't let anyone near him. He's just sitting there." Nell looked at Boone's split lip, at the torn jacket. "He's bleeding out in a warehouse on Harrisburg," she said, "because he went into a meeting unprepared." "Because he can't think straight without you," Boone said simply. "That's what I came to tell you. I'm not saying it to manipulate you. I'm saying it because it's true and someone has to." Nell was quiet for a moment. She looked at the wall, the same blank wall she had been staring at for 2 days. "Can you drive?" she asked. Boone blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "Then take me to Harrisburg." The warehouse smelled like rust and hydraulic fluid, and underneath that, the copper note she recognized from the times she'd had to walk through the aftermath of things she preferred not to think about. A single work light burned at the far end, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Mercer was sitting on a metal crate, jacket off, undershirt dark with a stain that had spread past caring about. His head was tipped back against the corrugated wall. A gun rested on his thigh. He looked pale in a way she had never seen him look pale, like the color had been settled into him for years, and someone had just begun to drain it. His eyes opened when she walked in. The gun came up, trained on the doorway. He held it there for 2 full seconds. Then he saw her face. The gun dropped to the floor. It just fell out of his hand. He stared at her. She had seen that look on him before, in the ledgers, the look of a man confronting a number that doesn't behave the way it should, a variable that refuses to be accounted for. "You're not here," he said. His voice was raw. "You're losing blood and making bad decisions," Nell said. "Move your hand." She crossed the warehouse floor, dropped her bag on a clean crate, and crouched in front of him. She pulled the first aid kit she'd made Boone stop for out of the bag and opened it on the floor. She pulled on a pair of black latex gloves. "This is going to hurt," she said. She pressed the gauze to the wound. He went rigid, the cords in his neck standing out, a sharp sound forced through clenched teeth, and his hands came down on her shoulders. Not pushing her away, gripping, like a man holding on to the only fixed point in a room that was spinning. She held the pressure steady. "The Delgado meeting," she said, without looking up. "I know," he said through his teeth. "You went in without the freight contract analysis, without the competing leverage on the Galveston terminal. I had it built in the secondary drive, and you didn't ask for it. I know. You were distracted." He didn't answer. She looked up at him. His face was close. She was still crouching in front of him, and the work light behind her made everything sharper, less forgiving. "I was not distracted by strategy," he said, "if that's what you're asking." "I know what you were distracted by," Nell said. "I need you to understand that the way you handled it was wrong." "I know that too. I'm not Owen Park. I'm not a liability you can quietly neutralize and move on from. I am a person who chose to be in that office, every day, for 3 years, because I chose it." She secured the bandage. She peeled off the gloves. "You don't get to choose it for me." Mercer looked at her for a long time. "No," he said, "I don't." "Owen's license is clean," she said. "You did that." "Yes." "Was that the first time you've done something like that? Gone after someone because of me?" He was quiet for exactly the length of time it would have taken him to decide to lie. Then, yes. She believed him. She had built her whole career on knowing when a number was falsified. This one wasn't. She stood up. She was still very close to him, close enough that when he exhaled, she felt it. "I'm not going to tell you what I feel," Nell said, "because I think you already know. And I think knowing it is the only reason you're still sitting here instead of letting Boone drive you to the hospital like a rational human being." Mercer's jaw moved. Something in his face that she had never seen before. Not vulnerability. That wasn't quite the word. More like the specific look of a man who has been carrying a very heavy calculation alone for a long time and has just been told someone else knows the total. "What do you want?" he said. "Tell me exactly, and I'll do it." Nell thought about her sofa and the blank wall and the tea she hadn't drunk and the 2 days of quiet that had felt like deprivation rather than rest. She thought about the coffee maker installed without comment, the sandwich from the corner place, every salary review that arrived without fanfare at a number that told her, in the only language he reliably spoke, what her presence was worth to him. "I want you to let Boone take you to the hospital," she said. "I want you to do exactly what the doctor tells you. And then I want you back in that office on Monday, and I want you to ask me, once directly, what I want the rest of this to look like. Not assume, ask." Mercer looked at her. "And what will you say?" he asked quietly. "Ask me on Monday," Nell said, "and find out." She held out her hand. After a moment, he took it, and she helped him stand. She had built her career on finding the number that didn't belong. The one hiding in the wrong column, the one someone had buried under layers of legitimate-looking figures. She was very good at it. She had never expected to spend 3 years sitting across a desk from the answer to a question she hadn't let herself ask. Gray Mercer had spent 3 years treating her competence like something worth protecting, and she had filed that under professional investment and refused to look deeper. It turned out that was the most expensive misfiling on her balance sheet. She looked at it clearly now, the whole ledger, both columns, nothing hidden. What she saw did not surprise her. What surprised her was how long she had managed to pretend the sum was 0. She let go of his hand when they reached the door, where Boone was waiting with the car. The Houston night was warm and smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. She had won nothing. She had not beaten him, and he had not beaten her. What had happened in that warehouse was something closer to a reconciliation of accounts. 2 people finally looking at what they actually owed each other, with no more room for false entries. On Monday she came in early, she made coffee, she put a clean file on his desk. When Mercer walked in, he stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. She looked back. "Ask me," she said. He asked.